arrived on the Hythe ferry is a handsome building known as God's House Tower. Originally called the South Gate or the South Castle and part of the old defensive walls of the town, it became known as God's House because it was nearby a hospice for the poor and sick, founded in the 12th century by a rich Southampton merchant as an act of piety and known as Maison Dieu, God's House. There are still almshouses in the vicinity, also known as God's House. The next thing you encounter is a tall brick wall concealing completely what takes place behind it. And you'd never guess what that was, save for a helpful sign which boldly proclaims, Southampton Old Bowling Green, world's oldest bowling green, $12.99. Well, at that rate, I expect it is. It's an extraordinary thought that men were playing bowls here nearly 300 years before Sir Francis Drake was reputedly playing his game on Plymouth Hoe prior to the Armada. In the early 16th century, there were very strict rules as to who could or could not play here. Inferior people, as they were called, were banned. You had to be a person of substance, which may or may not explain, and probably doesn't, why these chaps are so splendidly attired. They're Knights of the Green and are taking part in a tournament which has been played here every year since 1776, a pretty recent fixture in terms of this green.
Who's got the stick?
It's a bird.
Bob Atkinson, 7 5/8.
First, Bob Atkinson, 7 5/8.
Bob Atkinson won the last one.
It's a playoff to see if a new knight will be created. Now, don't ask me to explain the rules, but whoever first wins 7 points wins a knighthood and is addressed as Sir when on the green.
11 3/8. Right.
It can all take several days, so refreshments help the whole thing along. Even if you don't entirely understand what's going on, they clearly do. And it's a very pleasant sight.
Cheers. God bless.
Commoners.
Just along from the world's oldest bowling green is Queen's Park, so called because it, and God's House for that matter, is owned by Queen's College, Oxford. Now, here's a curiosity, a handsome marble monument in memory of General Gordon, Gordon of Khartoum. Curious because Gordon wasn't born in Southampton, he was a Londoner, but his father did retire to Southampton, and so he was visited by his bachelor son on his leaves from the army. Another curiosity, in equal prominence, the names of the mayor, the deputy chairman, and the borough surveyor of the time. So perhaps this is an instance of a monument erected not so much to the greater glory of Gordon, but to the greater glory of those who erected it. You next pass what is home for BBC folk in these parts, Southwestern House, formerly the once grand Southwestern Hotel. Here, passengers for the great liners would break their journeys before and after a voyage. But the liners have long gone, and with them the boat trains that carried passengers to and from London. It's now all tufts of grass and dereliction, and the BBC. Though happily the old station, a listed building, is to be saved. The old and the new, the Itchen Bridge, And what a stunner. Proof, if you like, that concrete can be beautiful. They'd been talking about a bridge across the Itchen since the time of William IV, and it finally arrived in 1977 at a cost of around £12 million. It's a toll bridge, and so they're paying off the £12 million with takings of some £400,000 a year. It's a good Solent Walk viewing point. The Vosper Thornycroft Yard, where naval ships are built. Also to be seen, as in Southampton proper, empty docks, which once used to be full of ships. In the shadow of Itchen Bridge, the ramps for the old chain ferry floating bridge, which used to carry cars and passengers between Southampton and Woolston. That was the waiting room. One beached ferry remains. Extraordinary to think that until the new bridge opened in '77, all traffic at this point had to rely on two old chuggers like that. Also gone from Woolston, the supermarine factory where the wartime Spitfire was built, though there is a plaque to the man who designed it, R.J. Mitchell, the man who, perhaps more than any other, ensured the successful outcome of the Battle of Britain. Southampton is now at my back. I'm plodding ahead on Western Shore, which is misleading since this is the Solent's eastern shore. But that's because Western is spelt W-E-S-T-O-N, as opposed to W-E-S-T, oh, never mind. Just look at the boats. And that's really the point. This is now a recreational area for sailing craft. The industrial complex at Fawley may dominate the coastline opposite, but there's no industrial bustle here. Bar the container vessels heading for the terminal at Millbrook, the big ships have gone. Just ghosts of the big liners and pretty sailing boats. And a rare sight, a splendid old sailing barge glides past. Because it's screened by hedges and tall trees, the next object of interest, Netley Abbey, is quite difficult to find. Well, the sign said it was along here. It is, you know. Netley Abbey was one of the last Cistercian abbeys to be founded in England. The daughter house of Beaulieu Abbey, a group of monks from there took up residence at Netley in 1239. But the abbey fell upon evil days, was dissolved in 1539, and subsequently became the ruin you see today. But a splendid ruin it is. And very large, yet from the road you'd hardly know it was here. A cloistered place indeed. Solent Way. Ah, Emsworth, that's the end of the way. Only 32 miles. Now, this at Netley was the site of the Royal Victoria Military Hospital, an enormous place with corridors a quarter of a mile long. That is all that remains. Just my luck, it just happens to be covered in scaffolding at the moment. But then they have to do these places up. For the origins of the Royal Victoria Hospital, we go back to the Crimean War and the appalling conditions encountered by Florence Nightingale and her nurses at the military hospital at Scutari. Of 54,000 British troops sent to the Crimea, 18,000 died. And of that number, for every soldier who died of his wounds, another 9 died of infection and disease. Florence Nightingale's indignant campaign for proper medical facilities caught the conscience of the public and moved and alerted the Queen. And it was Queen Victoria, more than any other, who determined that a decent hospital for her troops should be built. She kept up the impetus. Fields at Netley were purchased, and the Queen laid the foundation stone for the new hospital in 1856. In 1863, the first patients were admitted, the Queen maintaining her contact by regular royal visits. It's difficult today to grasp the scale and grandeur of the Royal Victoria Hospital. At 1,404 feet, it was one of the longest buildings in the world, and its huge facade dominated Southampton Water. It has to be said that Florence Nightingale, now returned to her home near Rumsey, did not approve of the place. She disliked the famous quarter-mile-long corridors, which resulted in the wards being at the back of the building and not at the front, facing south and overlooking Southampton Water. On the water, a long pier for offloading the wounded from troop ships. This was augmented much later by a railway which collected troops from ships berthing in Southampton. This was a hospital to serve the Empire. These are Boer War veterans. 15,000 died of typhus in that war, and others came here to be nursed. A sad irony is that the vaccine for typhoid was actually discovered at Netley, but wasn't available in time to be used during the war. An average of 3,000 patients a year were treated at Netley, but of course the overwhelming influx came with the terrible casualties of the First World War. On the first night of the Battle of the Somme, 21,000 men had been killed or wounded, and 4 days later, 33,000 casualties were on their way back to England. The main body of the hospital simply couldn't cope with the numbers, and a Red Cross hutted camp, Toy Town, was built, which doubled the capacity. In the wards of the main block, the floors gleamed, though the mind boggles at what the hygiene-obsessed Florence Nightingale would have made of the ward cat. Many patients found the sheer size of the place oppressive, though efforts were made to give it an humane face. And all testified to the quality of care which they received.